Elena stood outside the pack house doors at midnight, her heart pounding for a reason she could not yet explain. Something felt wrong. The air itself seemed heavier, as if the forest around her was holding its breath. Tomorrow she would marry Damon, the strongest alpha their territory had seen in 3 generations, and every wolf in the pack would be watching. Yet instead of joy, a cold thread of dread wound its way through her chest. She had felt it building for days, small and quiet, easy to ignore during daylight hours, but impossible to silence in the dark. She turned back toward the house and noticed a light still glowing in Damon's private study. It was late, far too late for pack business. Through the gap beneath the door, she could hear a voice, low and hurried. She stepped closer without meaning to, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. The voice was Mira's. Elena froze. Her younger sister rarely came to the main house this late, and never to Damon's study alone. She told herself it was nothing. Wedding logistics, perhaps, or some family matter Mira did not want to trouble her with the night before the ceremony. She almost believed it, almost turned and walked away, but something in the tone of the conversation, an intimacy she could not name, kept her rooted to the spot. She did not go in. She told herself she trusted her mate, her sister, her pack. She told herself that doubt on the eve of her wedding was only nerves, the kind every bride felt, and that tomorrow all of this uncertainty would dissolve the moment she said her vows. She turned away from the door and walked back to her room, refusing to let her mind wander further into suspicion. But sleep did not come easily that night. Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the room she had grown up in, remembering the day Damon had first looked at her across the gathering hall 3 years earlier. She had been unremarkable then, a quiet girl from a family with no particular standing in the pack hierarchy, while he was already being spoken of as the next alpha. When their eyes met, and the mate bond had settled into place, unmistakable and undeniable, the entire pack had gasped. She remembered the warmth of his hand closing over hers, the way he had promised, in front of everyone, that he would protect her for the rest of his life. She had believed him completely. Her sister Mira had been the first to hug her that day, laughing and crying at once, telling Elena she deserved every bit of happiness that had found her. Elena had held on to that memory for 3 years, using it as proof that her family was as devoted to her as she was to them. Now, lying awake with the sound of Mira's voice still echoing faintly in her mind, she wondered if that embrace had meant what she thought it meant. She thought of Kai next, the pack warrior who had been her closest friend since childhood, long before Damon had ever noticed her. Kai had a steadiness to him that she had always found comforting, a way of looking at problems without flinching from them. If anyone would tell her the truth, even an uncomfortable one, it would be him. She considered waking him, walking to his quarters and asking if he had noticed anything strange about Damon and Mira lately, but it was nearly 2 in the morning, and she was getting married in less than 12 hours. She decided, finally, to let it go. Whatever she had overheard, she would ask Damon about it plainly, once the wedding was behind them, and there was no pressure clouding either of their judgment. Morning arrived with the golden light of early autumn spilling across the packlands. Elena woke to the sound of her aunts already moving through the house, preparing linens and flowers for the ceremony that would take place the following week, once the formal mating rites were completed, and the larger celebration could be properly arranged. She had almost forgotten, in her exhaustion, that the wedding itself was still 7 days away. What she had walked in on the night before had not been the eve of anything. It had simply been an ordinary night, made strange only by her own uneasy imagination. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by embarrassment at how close she had come to confronting her mate over what was very likely nothing at all. She dressed and made her way downstairs, determined to shake off the unease of the previous night and focus on the details that still needed her attention. There was a seamstress arriving at noon to finish the final fitting of her gown, a meeting with the pack elders regarding the ceremony blessing, and a walk through the eastern garden where the vows would be exchanged. Damon met her in the main hall, his expression warm, his eyes finding hers the instant she appeared. He crossed the room and pressed a kiss to her forehead, murmuring how much he was looking forward to the days ahead. Elena studied his face for any sign of guilt, any flicker of something hidden, and found nothing but the same steady affection he had always shown her. She allowed herself to relax into his arms, deciding that whatever she had heard the night before was simply a conversation about wedding preparations that Mira, in her excitement, had wanted to keep as a surprise. Mira joined them minutes later, carrying a tray of tea, cheerful and bright as ever. She complimented Elena's hair, teased Damon about his nervousness, and behaved so naturally that Elena felt foolish for having doubted either of them. The three of them sat together in the morning light, and for a while, everything felt exactly as it should. Elena let herself believe, fully and completely, that her family was whole and her future was secure. It was Kai who first planted a different kind of doubt in her mind, though he did not mean to. He arrived later that afternoon to help move furniture for the ceremony preparations, and as he set down a crate of decorations, he asked, almost offhandedly, how long Damon and Mira had been discussing security arrangements for the wedding. Elena blinked, confused. She had not been aware of any such discussions. Kai, sensing he had said something he should not have, quickly changed the subject, but the seed had already been planted. That night, Elena found herself standing outside the study door again, though this time, she told herself she was only checking that the candles had been extinguished before bed. The room was empty, the desk cluttered with papers she did not usually see. Her eyes fell on a folded note tucked beneath a stack of ceremony documents, and though every instinct told her not to look, curiosity overpowered caution. She reached for it, hesitated, then withdrew her hand entirely. It was not her place to search through Damon's private correspondence. She was his mate, not his jailer. Trust, she reminded herself, was the foundation of everything they had built. She left the study without reading the note, telling herself that whatever it contained was none of her business, and that a marriage built on suspicion was no marriage worth having. She returned to her room feeling proud of her restraint, unaware that the choice to walk away that night would haunt her in the weeks to come, when the truth finally became impossible to ignore. The days that followed moved quickly, filled with fittings and flowers and the countless small tasks that came before a pack wedding of such significance. Elena buried herself in the preparations, grateful for the distraction, and slowly, the unease of that first night began to fade into the background of her memory. She told herself she had been foolish to doubt the two people she loved most in the world, and she promised herself she would not let paranoia steal the joy from what should have been the happiest season of her life. But somewhere beneath that promise, a small and stubborn part of her refused to fully let go. It waited, quiet and patient, for the next sign that something was wrong, and it would not have to wait very long. 7 days passed in a blur of fittings, flowers, and family visits, and the wedding that had once felt distant now stood only hours away. Elena spent the morning of the final preparations, walking through the eastern garden where the ceremony would take place, admiring the white blossoms the pack gardeners had woven through the wooden arch. She tried to memorize every detail, wanting to hold on to this feeling of anticipation for the rest of her life. Yet the closer the day came, the more she noticed small things that did not sit right, things she could not quite explain away. It began with Damon's phone. For as long as she had known him, he had never once locked it in her presence, leaving it face up on tables and counters without a second thought. That week, she noticed he had begun turning it face down whenever she entered a room, and once, when a message lit up the screen while he was distracted, he snatched it away so quickly that his tea nearly spilled across the table. He laughed it off, claiming it was pack business he did not want to bore her with before the wedding, and she nodded, choosing to believe him because the alternative was too painful to consider. Then there was the matter of the private jokes. Elena had always enjoyed watching Damon and Mira get along so well, grateful that her mate and her sister had formed an easy friendship, rather than the awkward distance that sometimes existed between in-laws. But lately, their jokes had taken on a quality she could not place, references to conversations she had not been part of, laughter that died the moment she walked into the room. She told herself sisters and future brothers were allowed their own rapport, that she was being oversensitive in the final stressful days before the ceremony. Kai noticed it too, though he said nothing to Elena directly. As a senior warrior responsible for security during the wedding preparations, he had reason to move freely through the pack house and grounds, and it was during one of his patrols that he first saw Damon and Mira standing unusually close together near the tree line behind the house, their heads bent toward one another in quiet conversation. He told himself it was nothing, that alphas and their future sisters-in-law often discussed family matters privately, and he continued his patrol without interrupting them. But the image stayed with him longer than he expected, a small splinter of doubt lodged beneath his usual calm. Over the following days, Kai began to notice a pattern. Damon and Mira seemed to find reasons to be alone together, with increasing frequency, always with a plausible excuse ready if anyone asked. Security details, wedding surprises, family errands. Each explanation was reasonable on its own, yet together, they formed a shape that troubled him. He was not the type of wolf to jump to conclusions, and he respected Elena too much to voice suspicions he could not prove. Instead, he decided to watch more closely, telling himself that if there truly was nothing to find, his vigilance would cost nothing but a little peace of mind. Elena, meanwhile, was fighting a similar battle within herself, though she did not know that Kai was fighting it too. She had begun to keep a mental list of the small inconsistencies that troubled her, the locked phone, the private jokes, the moments when Mira seemed to disappear for stretches of time no one could quite account for. Each item on its own felt petty, the kind of thing a jealous or insecure person might invent to justify their fears. She hated the idea of becoming that kind of woman, suspicious and small, unable to trust the people who loved her, so she pushed the list away each time it surfaced, choosing instead to focus on the practical details of the wedding, on the flowers and the vows and the future she had dreamed of, since the day the mate bond had chosen her. It was during a quiet afternoon, 3 days before the ceremony, that Elena decided to speak with Mira directly, not out of suspicion, but out of a genuine desire to reconnect with her sister amid the chaos of preparations. She found Mira in her room, sorting through a pile of clothing with unusual intensity, and asked if she wanted to take a walk together, just the two of them, away from the noise of the house. Mira agreed, though Elena noticed a flicker of hesitation cross her face, before she smiled and reached for her shoes. They walked along the familiar path that wound through the pack's private woods, a route the sisters had taken countless times since childhood. Elena spoke about her nervousness for the wedding, about how strange it felt to be marrying the wolf the entire pack had once thought was destined for someone with a more impressive bloodline. Mira listened, offering reassurances that sounded warm and sincere, telling Elena that she deserved every bit of happiness coming to her, that no one questioned the mate bond, because the mate bond did not choose wrongly. Elena wanted so badly to believe every word. But partway through their walk, Mira's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she glanced at it quickly before slipping it away, her expression tightening for the briefest moment, before she smoothed it back into pleasant neutrality. Elena asked, as casually as she could manage, who had messaged her. Mira said it was nothing important, just a friend asking about wedding plans, and changed the subject smoothly to the flowers that had arrived that morning. Elena let the moment pass, though she filed it away with the rest of the small inconsistencies she could not quite explain. That evening, Elena found herself once again standing near Damon's study, drawn by some instinct she did not fully understand. She told herself she only wanted to see him before dinner, to steal a few quiet minutes together, before the final rush of wedding preparations consumed every remaining hour. Through the door, she heard his voice, low and urgent, speaking in tones she rarely heard him use. She could not make out the words clearly, only the rhythm of a conversation that felt far too intimate for ordinary pack business. She knocked before she could stop herself, and the voices fell silent immediately. When Damon opened the door, his expression was carefully composed, though his eyes carried a flicker of something Elena could not name. He told her he had been on a call with a neighboring pack regarding wedding security, standard procedure given his position as alpha. Elena nodded, accepting the explanation, though a small part of her noted that he had not mentioned who exactly he had been speaking with, and she had not asked. Later that night, unable to sleep, Elena walked to Kai's quarters, needing to speak with someone who might offer clarity amid her swirling doubts. She found him awake, sharpening a blade by lamplight, and when she asked if he had noticed anything strange about Damon lately, his hands stilled for a long moment before he answered. He chose his words carefully, telling her only that he had seen Damon and Mira spending more time together than usual, but that he had no reason to believe it meant anything beyond ordinary family closeness during a stressful week. Elena thanked him and returned to her room, feeling no more settled than before, yet strangely comforted that she was not the only one who had noticed something amiss. She lay awake long into the night, turning over every small detail: the locked phone, the private jokes, the hushed conversation behind the study door, searching for some innocent explanation that would tie them all together and let her sleep in peace. None came. Instead, she drifted into an uneasy rest, unaware that the following night would bring her far closer to the truth than she was prepared for, and that once she saw it clearly, there would be no way to look away again. Kai could not shake the image of Damon and Mira standing so close together near the tree line, their heads bent in quiet conversation, as though the rest of the world did not exist. He told himself repeatedly that his suspicions were unfounded, that he was reading too much into ordinary behavior, yet the discipline that made him a skilled warrior also made him a careful observer, and careful observers rarely ignored patterns that repeated themselves. 2 nights before the wedding, Kai took the late patrol shift along the western boundary of the Packlands, a route that curved near the old stone bridge, where younger wolves sometimes gathered to escape the noise of the main house. He had walked this path 100 times before without incident, but that night, as he approached the bend where the trees grew thickest, he heard voices carried faintly on the wind. He recognized them instantly. He should have announced himself. Protocol demanded it, and courtesy demanded it even more. Instead, some instinct told him to stay quiet, to listen before revealing his presence, and he pressed himself against the trunk of an old oak, his breathing slow and controlled. Through the gaps in the branches, he could see Damon and Mira standing together near the bridge, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Their conversation was too quiet for him to make out clearly, fragments only, carried on gusts of wind that came and went without pattern. He caught the word after, and then, moments later, something that sounded like, "Once everyone believes it's real." He could not be certain of the exact phrasing, and he knew better than to build a case on words half heard in the dark. But the tone troubled him more than the words themselves, an intimacy and a conspiratorial closeness that had no place between an alpha and his mate's sister. He watched as Mira reached out and touched Damon's arm, a gesture so natural and familiar that it made Kai's stomach tighten with unease. Damon did not pull away. Instead, he covered her hand with his own for a brief moment, before releasing it, glancing around as though checking that they were truly alone. Kai remained motionless against the tree, grateful for the wind that carried his scent away from them, and waited until they parted ways, Mira heading back toward the main house, and Damon walking in the opposite direction, toward his private cabin near the ridge. Kai did not sleep that night. He sat in his quarters turning the scene over and over in his mind, searching for an innocent explanation and finding none that satisfied him. He thought of Elena, asleep in the main house, trusting completely in the wedding that awaited her in 2 days' time, and he felt a familiar ache of protectiveness he had carried for her since they were children running through these same woods together. He had never told her how deeply that protectiveness ran, had buried it beneath years of friendship and duty, choosing her happiness over his own feelings when the mate bond had chosen Damon instead of him. Now that happiness seemed to be balanced on a foundation that might not be as solid as everyone believed. He considered going to Elena immediately, laying out everything he had seen and heard, but he stopped himself. What proof did he actually have? A quiet conversation, a touch on the arm, fragments of words that could mean a dozen different things. He knew how devastating false accusations could be, how they could tear apart families and packs built on trust, and he was not willing to destroy Elena's happiness on the strength of shadows and half-heard whispers. He needed something concrete, something undeniable, before he brought this to her. The following morning, Kai requested a shift change that placed him near the main house rather than the outer boundaries, using his position as head of wedding security as justification. No one questioned it. He spent the day watching without appearing to watch, noting the way Mira seemed to find excuses to pass near Damon's study, the way Damon's eyes followed her when he thought no one was looking. Each observation on its own meant little. Together, they painted a picture Kai did not want to see. That afternoon, he found himself near the study when Mira slipped inside under the pretense of dropping off wedding paperwork. He lingered in the hallway, telling himself he was simply waiting to speak with Damon about security arrangements, and through the door, He heard their voices rise briefly before dropping back into careful whispers. He caught only a single clear sentence, spoken in Mira's voice, words that would echo in his mind for the rest of the day. She still doesn't suspect anything. Kai's blood ran cold. There was no innocent explanation for those words, none that he could construct no matter how he tried. He stepped back from the door before either of them could discover him listening and walked quickly toward the training grounds, needing space to process what he had just heard. His mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last, and beneath the shock was a rising anger he had rarely felt in all his years as a warrior. He knew he could not act rashly. If he confronted Damon directly, the Alpha would simply deny everything and dismiss Kai's concerns as jealousy or overreach, and Elena would be caught in the middle, forced to choose between her mate and her oldest friend, based on nothing more than accusations without proof. If he went to Elena immediately with only fragments and a single overheard sentence, he risked destroying her trust in him if he turned out to be wrong, or worse, giving Damon and Mira time to cover their tracks before the truth could be fully exposed. Kai decided, after much deliberation, that he needed to gather real evidence before saying anything to anyone. He began paying closer attention to the household's daily rhythms, noting when Damon left the main house and for how long, when Mira disappeared, and where she claimed to have been. He started keeping a mental record, dates and times, small details that individually meant nothing, but together might eventually form an undeniable pattern. That evening, as the household settled into the final quiet preparations before the wedding, Kai crossed paths with Elena in the garden, where she was walking alone among the flowers that would frame her ceremony in less than 2 days. She looked radiant in the fading light, her expression a mixture of nervous excitement and quiet joy, and Kai felt the weight of what he knew pressing against his chest like a physical thing. She asked him, teasingly, if he was ready to stand at her side as one of her witnesses, and he forced a smile, telling her he would not miss it for anything in the world. He almost told her then. The words rose in his throat, urgent and desperate to be spoken, but he swallowed them back, unwilling to shatter her happiness on an evening so close to her wedding, without something more solid to offer than suspicion and half-heard whispers. He told himself he would find the proof soon, that he owed her the truth, but he also owed her certainty, not the wreckage of unfounded accusations. She deserved better than doubt without evidence. As Elena continued through the garden, humming softly to herself, Kai watched her go, with a heaviness settling into his chest that would not lift. He did not know yet how quickly the situation would escalate, how soon the fragments he had gathered would resolve into something undeniable, or how much pain would come before the truth finally surfaced. He only knew that something was deeply wrong beneath the surface of the celebration surrounding them, and that time was running out to uncover it, before Elena walked down the aisle believing in a future that might already be crumbling behind her back. The night before the wedding, Elena could not settle into sleep, no matter how she tried. She had spent the evening surrounded by her aunts and cousins, laughing over old stories and sipping warm tea, yet beneath the celebration, a persistent unease had followed her throughout the night, refusing to be soothed by company or comfort. When the house finally quieted and everyone retired to their rooms, she lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the packlands settling for the night, and something pulled her from her bed with a force she did not fully understand. She told herself she simply wanted air, that the excitement of tomorrow had left her too restless to remain indoors, but her feet carried her instinctively toward the eastern woods, the same path she had walked with Mira only days before. The moon hung high and full above the trees, casting silver light across the familiar trail, and Elena wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked, uncertain what she was searching for, but unable to stop herself from searching. She heard the voices before she saw the figures, hushed and urgent, carried toward her on the cool night air. Her steps slowed instinctively, some deep instinct warning her to move quietly, and she followed the sound until she reached a small clearing bathed in moonlight, where two familiar shapes stood close together. Her heart stopped. Damon and Mira stood facing one another, close enough that their bodies nearly touched, their voices low and intense, in a way Elena had never witnessed between them before. She pressed herself against the trunk of a nearby tree, her breath catching in her throat, straining to hear words that seemed determined to stay just beyond her understanding. Fragments reached her on the wind, broken pieces of sentences that refused to form a complete picture, yet the tone alone told her everything her mind was desperate to deny. She could not make out the words clearly, only the unmistakable closeness between them, a familiarity that spoke of secrets shared and understandings reached long before this night. Mira's hand rested against Damon's chest, and he did not step back from the touch. Elena's entire body went cold, her fingers digging into the rough bark of the tree as she fought the urge to cry out, to demand an explanation, to shatter the quiet intimacy unfolding before her eyes. She did not move. She did not speak. She stood frozen in the shadows, watching the two people she trusted most in the world share a moment that felt like a betrayal, even though she still could not identify exactly what she was witnessing. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, Mira stepped back, wiping at her eyes as though overcome with emotion, and Damon reached out to steady her before they parted, walking in opposite directions back toward the house. Elena remained hidden long after they had gone, her mind spinning through possibilities that ranged from innocent to devastating, unable to settle on any explanation that made sense of what she had just seen. Perhaps Mira had been overwhelmed with emotion about losing her sister to marriage, and Damon had simply offered comfort as any future family member might. Perhaps there was pack business neither of them wanted to burden her with before her wedding day. She turned these explanations over in her mind, testing them for truth, finding each one thinner and less convincing than the last. She walked back toward the house slowly, her thoughts a tangled storm she could not calm. Every instinct told her something was deeply wrong, yet every hope she carried for her future begged her to find a reason to dismiss what she had seen. She thought of confronting them both immediately, of marching back into the clearing and demanding the truth, but her legs would not carry her in that direction. Instead, she found herself standing outside Kai's door once again, needing someone steady to help her make sense of what she had witnessed. Kai answered, before she even knocked, as though he had sensed her approaching, and one look at her face told him something significant had happened. He drew her inside, away from any ears that might overhear, and listened without interrupting, as she described what she had seen in the clearing. When she finished, his expression carried none of the surprise she expected, and that absence of surprise frightened her more than anything else could have. He hesitated for a long moment before speaking, clearly weighing how much to reveal, and Elena, recognizing the hesitation, pressed him gently to tell her everything he knew. Slowly, carefully, Kai described what he had witnessed over the past several days, the private conversations, the touch he had seen exchanged near the stone bridge, and finally, the sentence he had overheard through the study door that had haunted him ever since. She still doesn't suspect anything. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her, though she remained standing perfectly still. The room seemed to narrow around her, every sound muffled except the rapid beating of her own heart. She had spent days constructing excuses for every small inconsistency, refusing to let herself believe the worst about the two people she loved most. And now the excuses had finally run out of room to hide behind. She sank onto the edge of Kai's bed, her hands trembling in her lap, and asked him, in a voice barely above a whisper, what he thought it all meant. Kai chose his words with care, unwilling to speak with more certainty than he actually possessed. He told her he did not know for certain what was happening between Damon and Mira, only that the pattern of behavior he had observed left him deeply troubled, and that Elena deserved to know the truth before she walked down the aisle in less than 12 hours. He watched her carefully, ready to offer whatever comfort she needed, but Elena surprised him by straightening her shoulders and wiping the tears from her cheeks with unexpected resolve. She would not confront them tonight, she decided aloud, her voice steadier than she felt. If she went to them now, armed with nothing but suspicion and fragments of overheard conversation, they would simply deny everything, offer explanations crafted to soothe her doubts, and she would be left exactly where she had been for the past week, uncertain and unable to prove anything. She needed something undeniable, something that could not be explained away with a clever excuse or a reassuring smile. Kai watched the transformation happen before his eyes, the heartbroken woman who had walked into his room, replaced by someone calmer and more determined, and he felt a surge of admiration mixed with worry for what she might be planning. He asked her directly what she intended to do, and Elena admitted she did not fully know yet, only that she would not walk blindly into tomorrow without understanding exactly what she was walking into. They sat together for a long while as the night deepened around them, Kai offering what support he could, while Elena worked through the wreckage of her assumptions about the people she had trusted most. Neither of them slept that night. By the time the first light of dawn began creeping over the horizon, Elena had made a decision that would shape everything that followed, though neither she nor Kai yet understood how far it would take them, or how much would be revealed before the truth finally came fully into the light. Dawn broke pale and golden over the Packlands, and with it came the hurried footsteps of aunts and cousins preparing for the day everyone believed would be the happiest of Elena's life. She rose from Kai's room before the house fully woke, slipping back to her own quarters to wash the exhaustion from her face and steady her thoughts before facing the two people who had spent the last several days building a wall of secrets between themselves and everyone who loved them. She found Damon in the small dining room off the kitchen, already dressed and reviewing papers with the calm efficiency he brought to everything he did. He looked up when she entered and smiled, the same warm smile that had once made her believe the mate bond had chosen perfectly. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for some crack in his composure, some sign that he knew his secret had begun to unravel, but found nothing beyond the familiar affection he always showed her. She asked him plainly, without preamble, what he and Mira had been discussing in the eastern clearing the night before. She watched his expression carefully as she spoke, and for the briefest instant, something flickered behind his eyes, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He set down his papers and reached for her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles, as he explained that Mira had come to him overwhelmed with emotion, worried about losing her closest sibling to marriage, and uncertain how the family dynamic would shift once Elena moved into the Alpha's residence permanently. He said he had simply offered comfort, the kind any future brother might offer a sister struggling with change. Elena wanted so desperately to believe him. The explanation fit neatly around the edges of what she had seen, plausible enough to soothe the sharpest of her fears, and she found herself nodding along even as some quiet part of her mind whispered that the story did not fully account for the words Kai had overheard through the study door. She did not mention that detail to Damon. She was not yet ready to reveal how much she and Kai had already pieced together, unwilling to give him the chance to prepare a more convincing story before she had gathered proof of her own. Mira arrived moments later, carrying a tray of breakfast pastries, her expression bright and untroubled as she greeted Elena with a warm embrace. She spoke easily about the final wedding preparations, about the flowers that had arrived overnight, and the seating arrangements still needing adjustment, her voice carrying none of the strain Elena would have expected from someone hiding something significant. When Elena gently raised the subject of the previous night, asking if everything was all right, Mira's composure did not waver. She repeated nearly the same explanation Damon had given, almost word for word, about feeling overwhelmed at the thought of her sister's new life, about seeking comfort from the only person available at that late hour. The consistency between their stories should have reassured Elena. Instead, it deepened the unease sitting heavy in her chest, because the explanations matched too perfectly, rehearsed rather than spontaneous, the kind of alignment that came from careful preparation rather than honest coincidence. She smiled and thanked Mira for her honesty, accepted a pastry she had no appetite for, and excused herself to continue with the day's preparations, all while her mind raced through everything that had just been said. She found Kai later that morning near the training grounds and relayed the conversation in careful detail, watching his face as she described how neatly the two stories had aligned. Kai listened with the same troubled expression he had worn the night before, and when she finished, he asked the question that had been building in his own mind since he first overheard the sentence through the study door. If Mira had simply been overwhelmed with emotion about her sister's wedding, why would Damon reassure her that Elena still doesn't suspect anything? That was not the language of comfort offered to a grieving sister. That was the language of two people managing a secret. Elena had no answer for him, only the sinking certainty that something was being hidden from her, something far more significant than pre-wedding emotion. She wanted so badly to be wrong, to discover that her instincts had led her astray, and that the people she loved most had done nothing to deserve her suspicion. But every attempt to explain away what she had witnessed collapsed under the weight of the details that refused to fit. and she knew, with growing dread, that she could not walk into a wedding built on a foundation she no longer trusted. She made a decision that morning that surprised even herself. Rather than confronting Damon and Mira directly with her doubts, rather than demanding answers they had clearly already prepared to give, she would request a short delay to the wedding, citing overwhelming nerves and a need to properly settle her mind before making such a significant commitment. It was not a lie, not entirely. Her nerves were indeed overwhelmed, though not for the reasons anyone would assume. She approached the pack elders that afternoon, choosing Elder Corwin first, an old and respected wolf who had known her since childhood and had always shown her particular kindness. She explained, with practiced calm, that she wished to postpone the ceremony by several days, long enough to properly honor the gravity of the commitment she was about to make. Elder Corwin studied her closely, clearly sensing there was more beneath her request than simple bridal anxiety, but he did not press her for details she was unwilling to give. He agreed to speak with the Pack Council and arrange a brief postponement, framing it publicly as a matter of ensuring the ceremony's timing aligned with favorable omens, a tradition old enough that no one would question it. When Damon learned of the delay that evening, his reaction told Elena more than any words could have. For the briefest moment, frustration flashed across his face, before he caught himself and replaced it with understanding, telling her he supported whatever she needed to feel ready for their future together. But she had seen the flicker before the mask returned, and it confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. He was not simply disappointed by the delay. He was troubled by it, as though the extra days threatened something he had been counting on unfolding on schedule. Mira's reaction, when she heard the news, carried a similar undercurrent, a brightness that felt forced rather than genuine. Questions about the reason for the delay, phrased with just a bit too much urgency. Elena answered both of them with the same practiced calm she had shown the elders, revealing nothing of what she now knew, giving no indication that the days she had bought herself would be spent gathering the proof she needed, rather than settling her nerves. She had learned, in the span of a single sleepless night, that the truth would not come from confrontation. It would come from patience, from careful observation, and from evidence too undeniable to explain away with rehearsed words and practiced smiles. That night, as the pack house settled into an uneasy quiet, following the announcement of the delay, Elena sat with Kai in the garden, the same garden where the wedding arch still stood draped in white blossoms, and told him what she had decided. They would use the time she had bought to uncover the full truth, whatever it turned out to be, before she ever stood beneath that arch, and spoke vows she could no longer promise, with an open heart. Kai agreed without hesitation, and together, they began to plan how they would find the proof that would finally bring everything hidden into the light. The days following the announced delay moved with a strange, deceptive calm across the Packlands. To anyone watching from the outside, it appeared as though the postponement had simply given everyone a chance to breathe before the celebration resumed, the flowers still fresh in their vases, the wedding arch still standing proudly in the eastern garden. But beneath that calm surface, Elena and Kai worked with quiet determination, piecing together fragments of truth that had eluded them until now. Kai took charge of tracking movements around the pack house, using his position as head of security to justify his presence in places that might otherwise have seemed unusual for him to linger. He noted the times Damon left for supposed pack business and cross-referenced them against reports from other warriors who had no idea their casual observations were being collected for a purpose far more significant than routine security. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, one that did not match the explanations Damon had been offering for his frequent absences. Elena, meanwhile, focused her attention closer to home, watching her sister with an attentiveness she had never needed to employ before. She noticed the careful way Mira scheduled her days, always accounting for stretches of unexplained time, always ready with a plausible reason if questioned. She noticed, too, the small changes in Mira's behavior that she might have dismissed before her suspicions had been confirmed. The way her sister flinched slightly whenever Elena mentioned the wedding, the way she avoided meeting Elena's eyes during moments of genuine conversation. 3 days into their investigation, Kai brought Elena something that changed everything. He had been reviewing the household's financial records as part of his security duties, a task that gave him legitimate access to documents most pack members never saw, and among the routine expenses and vendor payments, he found something that did not belong. A series of transfers, modest in size but consistent in timing, moving from an account Damon controlled directly into an account that traced back, through several careful steps, to Mira. The transfers alone might have meant little on their own, easily explained as gifts or family support during the stressful wedding season. But paired with a receipt, Kai discovered tucked among discarded papers in the study, a receipt for a private cabin rental in a neighboring territory, paid for in cash, and scheduled to begin the day after the original wedding date, the pieces began to form a picture too clear to misunderstand. Kai brought the receipt to Elena that evening, watching her face carefully as she read the details, the location, the dates, the deliberate distance from their own packlands. She held the paper in trembling hands, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cabin had been reserved for 2 people. The reservation made under a name that belonged to neither Damon nor Mira directly, but which Kai had traced back through careful inquiry to a distant cousin of Damon's, someone who could be trusted to keep the arrangement quiet. Elena felt something inside her shift that evening, the last remnants of doubt finally giving way to a clarity that was almost peaceful in its certainty. She no longer needed to wonder if she had misread innocent gestures or overheard conversations out of context. The proof now sat in her hands, undeniable and complete. Damon and Mira had been planning to leave together, to abandon the wedding and the pack and everyone who trusted them, using the ceremony itself as cover for their disappearance. She asked Kai to help her find one final piece of proof, something that would confirm the timeline beyond any possibility of misunderstanding, and together they began searching more carefully through the papers Kai had already gathered. It was Elena herself who found the note, folded small and tucked into the lining of a jacket Mira had left hanging in a shared closet the sisters still used for storage. The handwriting was unmistakably Mira's, hurried and slanted the way it always became when she wrote quickly and without care for who might see it later. The note spoke of leaving together after the ceremony, of finally being free to be who they really were, without the constant weight of pretending, of a future neither of them had to hide any longer. Elena read it 3 times, each reading confirming what the first reading had already made clear. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not innocent comfort offered between family members overwhelmed by change. This was a plan, carefully constructed, meant to unfold at the exact moment Elena would be most vulnerable, standing at the altar in front of the entire pack, believing herself to be beginning her life as Damon's mate. Kai watched Elena carefully as she processed the full weight of what they had found, ready to offer whatever comfort she needed, but she surprised him again by remaining remarkably composed. The heartbreak was still there, visible in the tightness around her eyes, and the way her hands trembled slightly, even as she folded the note carefully and tucked it away for safekeeping. But beneath the heartbreak was something harder and more determined, a resolve that had been building since the night she first stood frozen in the eastern clearing, watching 2 people she loved share secrets that were never meant to include her. She told Kai, in a voice that had grown steady despite everything, that she would not confront Damon and Mira privately with what they had found. If she did, they would simply deny everything, destroy the evidence, and adjust their plans to avoid detection, leaving her with nothing but her word against theirs, and a pack that might not fully believe the woman who had already once postponed her own wedding over vague, unexplained nerves. She needed the truth to come out in a way that could not be denied, explained away, or hidden from the people who deserved to know exactly who their future alpha truly was. Kai asked her what she intended to do, and Elena explained the plan that had been forming in her mind over the past several sleepless nights. She would allow the wedding to proceed as though nothing had changed, continuing to play the role of the devoted, unsuspecting bride right up until the moment that mattered most. She would gather every piece of evidence they had found, organize it carefully, and prepare to reveal it not privately, not quietly, but at the one moment when Damon and Mira would have no room to maneuver, no opportunity to craft another convincing explanation. She would expose them at the altar itself, in front of the entire pack, where their carefully constructed deception would collapse under the weight of undeniable proof. Kai listened to her plan with a mixture of admiration and concern, recognizing both the courage it would take to carry out such a public reckoning and the pain it would cause her to stand before everyone and reveal the depths of her family's betrayal. He offered to help in whatever way she needed, and Elena, for the first time since this ordeal began, felt something that resembled hope rise through the heartbreak. She was no longer a woman waiting helplessly for the truth to surface on its own. She had become the one who would finally bring it into the light, on her terms, in front of the people whose trust Damon and Mira had so carelessly gambled with. With the truth now fully uncovered, Elena faced the hardest performance of her life, one that would require her to smile at the two people who had planned to shatter her happiness while gathering the final threads of evidence needed to expose them completely. She returned to wedding preparations with a composure that surprised even herself, greeting well-wishers with warm gratitude, discussing flower arrangements with genuine enthusiasm, and allowing Damon to hold her hand during pack gatherings without any outward sign of the storm raging beneath her calm exterior. The rescheduled wedding date approached quickly, and Elena used every remaining day to ensure the evidence she and Kai had gathered would be impossible to dismiss. She asked Kai to make careful copies of the financial transfers, the cabin reservation, and the note found in Mira's jacket, storing the originals somewhere secure while keeping duplicates ready for the moment she would need them. She wanted no possibility of Damon or Mira discovering the evidence and destroying it before she had the chance to reveal it publicly. Kai continued his quiet investigation, even as the wedding date drew closer, uncovering additional details that strengthened the case against the couple with each passing day. He learned that the cabin reservation had been extended, no longer scheduled for a single visit, but for an indefinite stay, suggesting Damon and Mira intended their departure to be permanent rather than a brief escape. He also discovered that Damon had been quietly transferring authority for several ongoing pack matters to his second-in-command, a young wolf named Silas, under the guise of preparing for an extended honeymoon that Elena knew nothing about and had certainly never agreed to. Elena absorbed each new piece of information with the same steady resolve she had maintained since the night she found the note, refusing to let the mounting evidence break the composure she needed to maintain until the right moment arrived. She spent time with Mira during those final days, listening to her sister discuss wedding details with a cheerfulness that now struck Elena as almost cruel in its dishonesty, and she found herself grateful for every acting lesson life had inadvertently taught her, every moment she had learned to mask pain behind a pleasant expression. The hardest moments came in the quiet hours before sleep, when the performance could finally drop and the full weight of the betrayal settled over her without distraction. She grieved, during those private hours, for the sister she thought she had known, for the childhood memories that now felt tainted by the knowledge of what Mira had been planning, even as she smiled and laughed alongside her. She grieved for the mate bond she had trusted so completely, for the future she had imagined with a man who had apparently been planning her humiliation from the very beginning, or at least for long enough that the depth of the deception felt almost impossible to comprehend. Kai remained a constant presence through those difficult nights, sitting with her in comfortable silence when words felt insufficient, offering steady support without ever pushing her toward decisions she was not ready to make. Their friendship, already strong before this ordeal began, deepened into something Elena had not expected, a partnership built on trust that stood in stark contrast to the betrayal she had discovered elsewhere. She found herself relying on him more than she had anticipated, grateful for his steadiness in a world that had otherwise become unpredictable and cruel. As the wedding date approached, Elena also began preparing for the practical aspects of her plan, considering exactly how and when she would reveal what she had discovered. She decided the moment must come during the ceremony itself, at the point when the officiant traditionally asked if anyone present objected to the union, a moment built into pack tradition, specifically to ensure no marriage proceeded under false pretenses. It was, she realized with grim satisfaction, the perfect opportunity, a tradition designed for exactly this purpose, now finally being put to its intended use. She rehearsed what she would say in the privacy of her room, speaking the words aloud until they no longer caught in her throat, until she could deliver them with the same steady clarity she intended to use when the moment finally arrived. She practiced remaining calm even as she imagined the reactions of those around her, the gasps of shock, the confusion, the eventual understanding that would spread through the gathered crowd as the evidence became clear. She wanted her voice to carry authority, not hysteria, wanted the pack to see her as someone claiming justice, rather than someone consumed by grief or anger, even though both grief and anger burned fiercely beneath her calm exterior. Elder Corwin, sensing that something remained unresolved despite Elena's outward calm, approached her privately during the final days before the wedding, asking gently if she was certain she wished to proceed. Elena met his knowing gaze and told him only that she needed the ceremony to happen exactly as planned, without further delay, and that he would understand everything in time. The old wolf studied her for a long moment, clearly sensing there was more beneath her request than she was willing to share, but he respected her wishes and did not press further, trusting the judgment of a woman he had watched grow from childhood into someone capable of remarkable strength. Kai, in the final days before the wedding, took on the responsibility of ensuring the evidence would be accessible at exactly the right moment. He arranged for copies of the financial records and the reservation confirmation to be sealed in an envelope that Elena could carry discreetly, tucked into the folds of her wedding gown, where no one would think to look. He also spoke quietly with a few trusted warriors, ensuring that if chaos erupted during the ceremony, security would remain calm and controlled, rather than allowing the situation to spiral into something more dangerous. 2 nights before the wedding, Elena stood once more in the eastern garden where the ceremony would take place, looking at the wedding arch draped in white blossoms that had somehow survived the delay without wilting. She thought of the woman she had been just weeks earlier, naive and trusting, certain that the mate bond guaranteed a happiness nothing could threaten. That woman felt like a stranger to her now, replaced by someone harder and more clear-eyed, someone who understood that love without honesty was nothing more than an elaborate performance, and that she deserved far more than a lifetime spent as an unwitting audience to someone else's deception. She felt no satisfaction in what she was about to do, no eagerness for the confrontation ahead, only a quiet determination that had settled deep into her bones. Whatever pain the revelation caused, whatever chaos followed in its wake, she knew she could no longer walk forward, pretending the truth did not exist. She owed herself that much clarity, that much courage, even if it meant standing before the entire pack and revealing the wreckage of the family and the future she had once believed in so completely. The wedding was 2 days away, and for the first time since this ordeal began, Elena felt something close to peace, the peace that comes from finally choosing truth over comfortable illusion, no matter the cost. The morning of the wedding arrived with a clear sky stretched wide over the packlands, sunlight spilling gold across the eastern garden, where rows of chairs now stood arranged around the flower-draped arch. Elena woke before dawn, long before the household stirred, and lay quietly in the stillness, gathering her thoughts before the day's demands would sweep her into a current she could not control until the moment she chose to act. She dressed slowly for the final fitting of her gown, her aunts fussing over the delicate lacework while she stood perfectly still, her mind far away from the fabric and pins surrounding her. The gown was beautiful, ivory silk embroidered with silver thread that caught the light whenever she moved, and under different circumstances, she knew she would have felt nothing but joy wearing it. Instead, she felt the weight of the sealed envelope Kai had prepared, tucked carefully into a hidden pocket sewn into the gown's inner lining, a small but heavy reminder of what the day would truly hold. Mira arrived early to help with preparations, her excitement seemingly genuine, as she adjusted Elena's veil and complimented the way the morning light caught the embroidery. Elena watched her sister move through the familiar rituals of wedding day preparation, braiding small flowers into her hair, fussing over the placement of her jewelry, and felt a fresh wave of grief wash through her at how easily Mira maintained her cheerful performance even now, hours away from the moment her betrayal would finally be exposed to everyone who loved her. Elena forced herself to smile through the preparations, to laugh at the small jokes Mira made, to accept her sister's help without any outward sign of the storm building beneath her calm exterior. She thought of Kai, somewhere in the house completing his final security preparations, and drew strength from knowing she was not facing this day entirely alone. He had promised to be near the front during the ceremony, positioned where he could step forward the moment she needed him, and that promise had carried her through the sleepless nights leading up to this morning. Guests began arriving by mid-morning, filling the pack grounds with cheerful conversation and laughter. Wolves from neighboring territories who had traveled significant distances to witness the union between Elena and the Alpha, everyone believed to be marrying for love. Elena greeted each arrival with practiced warmth, accepting congratulations and well wishes, with a grace that masked the tremor running beneath her calm surface. She caught glimpses of Damon across the grounds, dressed in formal attire, befitting his position, greeting guests with the confident charm that had first drawn the pack's admiration years earlier. She watched him from a distance, studying the man she had once believed would spend his life protecting her, searching his relaxed demeanor for any sign that he suspected what waited for him at the altar. She found nothing but easy confidence, the assurance of a wolf who believed his plans had proceeded exactly as intended, unaware that the woman he planned to humiliate had spent the past week gathering the proof that would soon unravel everything he had built. As the hour of the ceremony approached, Elena retreated to a private room to complete her final preparations, and it was there that Kai found her, slipping quietly through the door to check on her one last time before the ceremony began. He studied her face carefully, searching for any sign that her resolve had wavered, and found instead a steadiness that reassured him she was ready for what lay ahead. He confirmed that the envelope remained secure, that the copies of the evidence were exactly where they needed to be, and that he would be positioned close enough to intervene the instant she needed support. Elena thanked him quietly, her voice steady despite the tremendous weight pressing against her chest, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them carrying more comfort than words could have offered. Kai reminded her, gently, that whatever happened once the ceremony began, she would not be facing it alone, that he and several trusted warriors would ensure the situation remained controlled, no matter how the pack reacted to what she was about to reveal. She nodded, grateful beyond words for his steady presence throughout an ordeal that had tested every ounce of strength she possessed. The ceremonial horn sounded across the pack grounds, signaling that the time had come for the wedding to begin, and Elena felt her heart lurch despite the resolve she had spent days building. She took a final steadying breath, smoothed the delicate fabric of her gown, and made her way toward the entrance of the garden, where her father waited to walk her down the aisle, unaware of everything his daughter had discovered, and everything she intended to do once she reached the altar. Her father offered his arm with tears already gathering in his eyes, overwhelmed with pride at seeing his daughter on what he believed to be the happiest day of her life. Elena took his arm, forcing her expression into the serene calm the moment demanded, and together they began the slow walk toward the flower-draped arch where Damon waited, his eyes finding hers the instant she came into view, his expression softening with what appeared to be genuine affection. The gathered pack rose to their feet as she passed, faces bright with joy and anticipation, none of them aware that the ceremony they had traveled so far to witness was about to unfold in a way none of them could have anticipated. Elena walked slowly, deliberately, taking in every detail of the garden she had helped design, the flowers she had chosen, the arch she had once imagined standing beneath with genuine happiness, rather than the grim determination now carrying her forward, one careful step at a time. She caught sight of Mira near the front of the gathering, dressed in soft blue, her expression a careful mixture of joy and something else Elena now recognized as poorly concealed anxiety. She caught sight of Kai as well, positioned exactly where he had promised to be, his eyes meeting hers with silent reassurance as she passed. She felt the weight of the sealed envelope against her side, a physical reminder of the truth she carried, and drew strength from its presence, as she continued her measured walk toward the man who believed himself only moments away from completing a plan built on months of careful deception. As she reached the arch, and her father placed her hand gently into Damon's waiting palm, stepping back to take his seat among the gathered witnesses, Elena looked up into the face of the wolf she had once believed was her destined mate, and felt nothing but steady resolve settling into place. The ceremony was about to begin. And for the first time since discovering the depth of the betrayal surrounding her, Elena felt entirely, completely ready for what came next. The officiant began the ceremony with the traditional words spoken at every pack wedding for generations, welcoming the gathered witnesses and speaking of the sacred nature of the mate bond that had brought Elena and Damon together. Elena stood facing him, her hand resting in his, her expression calm and composed while her heart pounded steadily beneath the surface, counting down the moments until the ceremony would reach the point where everything she had prepared would finally come into play. She listened as the officiant spoke of loyalty and devotion, of the promises about to be exchanged between two wolves bound by fate itself, and she felt the bitter irony of every word settle heavily against her chest. Damon squeezed her hand gently during the speech, his expression carrying every appearance of a devoted mate, eager to begin his life with the woman beside him, and Elena marveled, even now, at how convincingly he could perform affection he apparently did not feel. The ceremony moved through its familiar stages, the recitation of pack history, the blessing offered by Elder Corwin, the exchange of ceremonial tokens meant to symbolize the couple's commitment to one another. Elena participated in each ritual with steady composure, her voice clear when required to speak, her movements graceful and unhurried despite the storm building within her. She caught occasional glimpses of Mira among the gathered witnesses, her sister's expression growing increasingly strained as the ceremony progressed, as though some instinct warned her that something was about to go terribly wrong. Finally, the officiant reached the moment Elena had been waiting for, the traditional pause built into every pack wedding, the moment when he would ask the gathered witnesses if anyone present had reason to believe the union should not proceed. This tradition, older than anyone could fully remember, existed specifically to ensure no marriage moved forward under false pretenses, a safeguard designed for exactly the situation Elena now found herself facing. The officiant turned to address the crowd, beginning to speak the ceremonial words that would open the floor to any objection. Elena spoke before he could finish. Her voice carried clearly across the silent garden, steady and unwavering, despite the tremendous weight of the moment pressing against her chest. She stated that she herself wished to speak, that she had discovered something in the days leading up to this ceremony that the pack deserved to know before any vows were exchanged. A ripple of confusion moved through the gathered crowd, guests exchanging uncertain glances, unsure whether this was some unfamiliar tradition or something far more serious unfolding before them. Damon's hand tightened around hers, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he registered the resolve in her voice. He asked her quietly what she meant, his composure beginning to crack for the first time since the ceremony began, but Elena withdrew her hand from his grasp and turned to face the gathered pack directly, reaching into the hidden pocket of her gown to retrieve the sealed envelope she had carried throughout the entire ceremony. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent garden, explaining that she had discovered evidence of a plan involving her intended mate and her own sister. A plan to leave together following the wedding, using the ceremony itself as cover for an escape they had been preparing for weeks. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she spoke, faces turning toward Damon and then toward Mira, confusion rapidly transforming into shock as Elena continued laying out what she had discovered with methodical, unshakable clarity. She opened the envelope and held up the documents inside for the gathered witnesses to see, the record of financial transfers moving quietly between accounts, the reservation for a private cabin scheduled to begin the day after their original wedding date, and finally, the note written in Mira's own handwriting, describing a future the two of them intended to build together once the deception surrounding this ceremony had served its purpose. She read a portion of the note aloud, her voice steady even as the words themselves felt like knives twisting in her own chest, watching the color drain from Mira's face as recognition of her own handwriting spread through the crowd. Damon's composure shattered completely as Elena continued speaking, his attempts to interrupt and offer explanations falling apart under the weight of evidence too specific and too damning to dismiss as misunderstanding. He reached for her arm, his voice pleading now rather than confident, insisting there was context she did not understand, but Elena stepped back from his touch, her expression unwavering as she addressed the elders directly, asking them to examine the evidence themselves rather than accepting explanations crafted only after being caught. Mira, near the front of the gathering, had gone completely still, her earlier anxiety replaced by open panic as every eye in the garden turned toward her. She opened her mouth as though to speak, to offer some defense or denial, but no words emerged, the truth written so plainly across her stricken expression that further denial would have been pointless even if she had found the words to attempt it. Elena watched her sister's composure crumble entirely, and felt, beneath the anger and heartbreak that had carried her through this moment, a flicker of something that might have been grief for the relationship they had once shared, before this betrayal had poisoned everything between them. Elder Corwin stepped forward from among the gathered witnesses, his expression grave as he examined the documents Elena offered him, and the garden fell into a heavy, stunned silence as he reviewed the evidence with careful attention. When he finally looked up, his voice carried the weight of both sorrow and authority as he addressed the crowd, confirming that the evidence appeared genuine and that the ceremony could not proceed under circumstances built upon such a fundamental betrayal of trust. Kai moved forward from his position near the front of the gathering, standing close beside Elena as the full weight of what had just unfolded settled over the stunned crowd. Whispers began spreading through the gathered witnesses, shock giving way to outrage, as the implications of what Elena had revealed became fully clear to everyone present. Damon stood alone beneath the flower-draped arch, stripped of the confidence he had carried into the ceremony, facing a pack that now looked upon him with suspicion rather than admiration. Elena stood tall amid the chaos she had set into motion, her gown catching the afternoon light, the sealed envelope now empty in her trembling hands. The wedding that had been meant to bind her to Damon forever had instead become the moment that exposed him completely, and though her heart ached with a grief she knew would take a long time to heal, she felt something else beginneth the pain, a clean and steady relief at finally standing in the full light of truth, no longer forced to carry the weight of secrets that were never hers to keep. The days following the wedding that never was moved through the Packlands, like the aftermath of a storm, leaving behind a landscape that looked familiar but felt fundamentally changed. News of what had happened at the altar spread quickly beyond the gathered witnesses, carried through the territory by wolves eager to share the shocking turn of events, and within days, every pack member and several neighboring territories had heard some version of how Elena had exposed her intended mate and her own sister in front of the entire community. The pack council convened within hours of the failed ceremony, gathering to determine how to proceed, given the severity of what Damon had attempted. Elder Corwin presented the evidence Elena had gathered, laying out the financial records, the cabin reservation, and the note in Mira's handwriting before the assembled leadership, and the council's judgment came swiftly and without much deliberation. An alpha who would deceive his own mate and betray the trust the entire pack had placed in him could not be permitted to retain his position, regardless of the influence his bloodline had once commanded. Silas, who had unknowingly been positioned to assume greater authority during what Damon had intended as an extended and permanent absence, found himself formally challenged to take on leadership in truth rather than in temporary delegation. The formal challenge for alpha status followed pack tradition precisely, and Damon, stripped of the credibility and support that had once made him nearly unchallengeable, found himself without the backing needed to defend his position. Within a matter of days, leadership of the pack passed to Silas, a transition the community accepted with visible relief, given everything that had come to light. Mira's fate proved even more severe than Damon's, the pack's judgment toward her carrying an added weight of betrayal that came from breaking the bond of trust between sisters rather than simply the bond between mates. The council ruled that she could no longer remain within Packlands, her presence a constant and painful reminder of the deception she had helped orchestrate against her own family. She was given a short window of time to gather her belongings and depart, banished from the territory that had been her home since birth, her future left uncertain and largely of her own making. Elena did not attend the formal proceedings that determined Mira's banishment, unable to bring herself to witness her sister's final departure from the only home either of them had ever known. She spent that difficult day instead in the quiet company of Kai, sitting together in the garden that had once been prepared for her wedding, now stripped of its flowers, and returned to its ordinary, unremarkable state. She grieved, during those hours, not for the wedding that had been stolen from her, but for the sister she had lost long before the truth had finally come to light, a sister who had apparently been willing to sacrifice everything between them for a betrayal she had planned with careful, deliberate intention. In the weeks that followed, Elena found herself the subject of considerable attention throughout the pack, wolves approaching her with expressions of sympathy mixed with genuine admiration for the courage she had shown in exposing the deception rather than quietly enduring a marriage built on lies. She accepted their kindness with the same steady grace that had carried her through the ceremony itself, slowly beginning to rebuild a sense of normalcy in a life that had been fundamentally upended by discoveries she had never wanted to make. Kai remained a constant presence throughout this period of rebuilding, his steady support never wavering even as the initial shock of the wedding's collapse gave way to the slower, harder work of healing that followed. Elena found herself increasingly grateful for his friendship, recognizing in him a loyalty that stood in stark contrast to everything she had discovered about Damon and Mira. A loyalty that had never once wavered, even when the truth he carried might have been easier to keep hidden. Their friendship deepened gradually over the following months, built not on the dramatic intensity of a sudden mate bond, but on years of accumulated trust and the shared experience of navigating one of the most difficult chapters of Elena's life together. She found herself noticing things about Kai she had perhaps always known, but never fully allowed herself to appreciate. The quiet steadiness of his presence, the careful way he considered his words before speaking them, the unwavering support he had offered, without ever asking for anything in return. New Alpha Silas proved a capable and respected leader, guiding the pack through the difficult transition, with a fairness that earned him the community's trust far more quickly than anyone had anticipated. Under his leadership, the pack slowly settled back into its familiar rhythms, the shock of the failed wedding gradually fading into the background of collective memory, though it remained a story that would be told and retold for years to come, a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception and the courage required to confront it. Elena, for her part, emerged from the ordeal transformed in ways she was only beginning to fully understand. The naive young woman who had once believed the mate bond guaranteed unshakable happiness had given way to someone stronger and more clear-eyed, someone who understood that trust had to be earned continuously, rather than assumed, simply because fate had made a particular pairing. She carried this understanding forward into every relationship that followed, grateful for the painful lesson, even as she wished it had never been necessary to learn it at all. Nearly a year after the wedding that never was, Elena stood once again in the Eastern Garden, though this time the occasion carried none of the anxiety and hidden dread that had accompanied her first attempt at marriage. Kai stood beside her, his expression carrying a quiet joy that matched her own, as the pack gathered once more to witness a union built this time on honesty rather than concealment, on a partnership that had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger for having survived it. As the ceremony began, Elena thought back to the woman she had been standing beneath this same arch a year earlier, frozen with dread, even as she projected calm to the gathered crowd, carrying secrets and evidence hidden in the folds of her gown. That woman felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone who had learned that true strength came not from blind trust but from the courage to seek truth, even when it threatened everything she thought she wanted. She had lost a sister and a mate she believed fate had chosen for her, but in their place, she had found something far more valuable, the unshakable knowledge of her own resilience, and a partner who had proven, through every difficult day of the ordeal, that his loyalty had never needed the intervention of fate to make it real.